it looks like this is by Dennis Wheatley, but it's not. It's by William Hope Hodgson, and it's The Ghost Pirates. And it's an old one. Let's see. 1909 it was first published. I'm going to read from sort of late in the book, so, I mean, it's called The Ghost Pirates, so you can kind of imagine there are going to be, like, kind of ghosty, piratey things in there, so I hope I'm not giving away too much. I picked this more or less at random because I remember that although I enjoyed the entire book, not so very long ago, I enjoyed it more and more as it went on, and that's partly because of all the running around in the rigging. This man, William Hope Hodgson, left his family when he was 13 to be a cabin boy. He ended up being on the ships for 20 or 30 years, the tall ships, and I don't think that's what they called them, schooners, sailing ships, whatever, I don't know. But he knows. He has all the lingo. He has elements that one would never consider. These people do not ever leave this ship. They are on a ship the whole time, and most of the time they seem to be either on the deck looking out or running around in the rigging, and it's fascinating. You will have to, as usual, forgive my accents. The Man Who Cried for Help. It was, as I have said, on the following night that something further happened, and it brought home pretty vividly to me, if not to any of the others, the sense of a personal danger aboard. We had gone below for the 8 to 12 watch, and my last impression of the weather at 8 o'clock was that the wind was freshening. There had been a great bank of cloud rising astern, which had looked as if it were going to breeze up still more. At 11:45, when we were called for our 12 to 4 watch on deck, I could tell at once by the sound that there was a fresh breeze blowing. At the same time, I heard the voices of the men on the other watch, singing out as they hauled on the ropes. I caught the rattle of canvas in the wind, and guessed that they were taking the royals off her. I looked at my watch, which I always kept hanging in my bunk. It showed the time to be just after the quarter, so that, with luck, we should escape having to go up to the sails. I dressed quickly, and then went to the door to look at the weather. I found that the wind had shifted from the starboard quarter to right aft, and by the look of the sky there seemed to be a promise of more before long. Up aloft I could make out faintly the fore and mizzen royals flapping in the wind. The main had been left for a while longer. In the fore riggings, Jacobs, the ordinary seaman in the mate's watch, was following another of the men aloft to the sail. The mate's 2 prentices were already up the mizzen. Down on deck, the rest of the men were busy clearing up the ropes. I went back to my bunk and looked at my watch. The time was only a few minutes off 8 bells. So I got my oilskins ready, for it looked like rain outside. As I was doing this, Jock went to the door for a look. "What's it doing, Jock?" Tom asked, getting out of his bunk hurriedly. "I'm thinking maybe it's going to blow a wee, and you'll be needing your oilskins." Oh, I guess I should have given him a Scottish accent. Oh well, whatever. When 8 bells went, and we mustered aft for roll call, there was a considerable delay, owing to the mate refusing to call the roll until Tom, who, as usual, had only turned out of his bunk at the last minute, came aft to answer his name. When at last he did come, the second and the mate joined in giving him a good dressing down for a lazy soldier, so that several minutes passed before we were on our way forward again. This was a small enough matter in itself, and yet really terrible in its consequence to one of our number, for, just as we reached the fore rigging, there was a shout aloft, loud above the noise of the wind, and the next moment something crashed down into our midst with a great slogging thud, something bulky and weighty that struck full upon Jock, so that he went down with a loud, horrible, ringing ugh, and never said a word. From the whole crowd of us there went up a yell of fear, and then with one accord there was a run for the lighted forecastle. I am not ashamed to say that I ran with the rest. A blind, unreasoning fright had seized me, and I did not stop to think. Once in the forecastle and the light, there was a reaction. We all stood and looked blankly at one another for a few moments. Then someone asked a question, and there was a general murmur of denial. We all felt ashamed, and someone reached up and unhooked the lantern on the port side. I did the same with the starboard one, and there was a quick movement towards the door. As we streamed out on deck, I caught the sound of the mates' voices. They had evidently come down from the poop to find out what had happened, but it was too dark to see their whereabouts. "Where the hell have you all got to?" I heard the mate shout. The next instant they must have seen the light from our lanterns, for I heard their footsteps coming along the deck at a run. They came the starboard side, and just abaft the fore-rigging. One of them stumbled and fell over something. It was the first mate who had tripped. I knew this by the cursing that came directly afterwards. He picked himself up and, apparently without stopping to see what manner of thing it was that he had fallen over, made a rush to the pin-rail. The second mate ran into the circle of light thrown by our lanterns and stopped, dead, eyeing us doubtfully. I am not surprised at this now, nor at the behavior of the mate the following instant, but at that time I must say I could not conceive what had come to them, particularly the first mate. He came out at us from the darkness with a rush and a roar like a bull, and brandishing a belaying pin. I had failed to take into account the scene which his eyes must have shown him. The whole crowd of men in the forecastle, both watches, pouring out onto the deck in utter confusion, and greatly excited, with a couple of fellows at their head, carrying lanterns. And before this there had been the cry aloft and the crash down on deck, followed by the shouts of the frightened crew and the sounds of many feet running. He may well have taken the cry for a signal, and our actions for something not far short of mutiny. Indeed, his words told us that this was his very thought. "I'll knock the face off the first man that comes a step further aft," he shouted, shaking the pin in my face. "I'll show yer who's master here. What the hell do you mean by this? Get forward into your kennel." There was a low growl from the men at the last remark, and the old bully stepped back a couple of paces. "Hold on, you fellows," I sung out. "Shut up a minute." "Mr. Tulipson," I called out to the second, who had not been able to get a word in edgewise, "I don't know what the devil's the matter with the first mate, but he'll not find it paid to talk to a crowd like ours in that sort of fashion, or there'll be ructions aboard." Come, Jessup, this won't do. I can't have you talking like that about the mate," he said sharply. "Let me know what's to do, and then go forward again, the lot of you." Sorry, I'm a little confused about who's the first mate and who's the second mate here, so. I am a bad reader. Okay, carry on. Just pretend you're going to sleep, and it doesn't matter if it's totally unprofessional. "We'd have told you at first, sir," I said, "only the mate wouldn't give us a good... We'd have told you at first, sir," I said, "only the mate wouldn't give any of us a chance to speak. There's been an awful accident, sir. Something's fallen from aloft, right on to Jock." I stopped suddenly, for there was a loud crying aloft. "Help! Help! Help!" Someone was shouting, and then it rose from a shout into a scream. "Ah!" "My God, sir!" I shouted. "That's one of the men up at the fore-royal." "Listen!" ordered the second mate. "Listen!" Even as he spoke, it came again, broken and, as it were, in gasps. "Help! Oh, God! Oh, help! Help!" Abruptly, Stubbins' voice struck in. "Hup with us, lads! By God, hup with us!" And he made a spring into the fore-rigging. I shoved the handle of the lantern between my teeth and followed. Palmer was coming, but the second mate pulled him back. "That's sufficient," he said. "I'm going," and he came up after me. We went over the foretop, racing like fiends. The light from the lantern prevented me from seeing to any distance in the darkness, but at the cross-trees Stubbins, who was some ratlines ahead, shouted out all at once and in gasps. "They're fighting like hell!" "What?" called the second mate breathlessly. Apparently Stubbins did not hear him, for he made no reply. We cleared the cross-trees and climbed into the topgallant rigging. The wind was fairly fresh up there, and overhead there sounded the flap of sailcloth flying in the wind, but since we had left the deck, there had been no other sound from above. Now, abruptly, there came again a wild crying from the darkness over us. A strange, wild medley it was of screams for help mixed with violent, breathless curses. Beneath the royal yard, Stubbins halted and looked down to me. "Hurry up! With their lantern! Jessup!" he shouted, catching his breath between the words. "There'll be murder done him! In a minute!" I reached him and held the light up for him to catch. He stopped and took it from me. Then, holding it above his head, he went a few ratlines higher. In this manner, he reached to a level with the royal yard. From my position, a little below him, the lantern seemed but to throw a few straggling, flickering rays along the spar, yet they showed me something. My first glance had been to windward, and I had seen at once that there was nothing on the weather yard arm. From there my gaze went to leeward. Indistinctly I saw something upon the yard that clung, struggling. Stubbins bent towards it with the light. Thus I saw it more clearly. It was Jacobs, the ordinary seaman. He had his right arm tightly round the yard. With the other, he appeared to be fending himself from something on the other side of him and further out upon the yard. At times, moans and gasps came from him, and sometimes curses. Once, as he appeared to be dragged partly from his hold, he screamed like a woman. His whole attitude suggested stubborn despair. I can scarcely tell you how this extraordinary sight affected me. I seemed to stare at it without realizing that the affair was really happening. During the few seconds which I had spent staring and breathless, Stubbins had climbed round the after side of the mast, and now I began again to follow him. From his position below me, the second had not been able to see the thing that was occurring on the yard, and he sung out to me to know what was happening. "It's Jacobs, sir," I called back. "He seems to be fighting with someone to leeward of him. I can't see very plainly yet." Stubbins got round onto the lee foot-rope, and now he held the lantern up, peering, and I made my way quickly alongside of him. The second mate followed, but instead of getting down onto the foot-rope, he got on the yard and stood there holding onto the tie. He sung out for one of us to pass him up the lantern, which I did, Stubbins handing it to me. The second held it out at arm's length so that it lit up the lee part of the yard. The light showed through the darkness as far as to where Jacobs struggled so weirdly. Beyond him, nothing was distinct. There had been a moment's delay while we were passing the lantern up to the second mate. Now, however, Stubbins and I moved out slowly along the foot-rope. We went slowly, but we did well to go at all, with any show of boldness, for the whole business was so abominably uncanny. It seems impossible to convey truly to you the strange scene on the royal yard. You may be able to picture it yourselves. The second mate standing upon the spar, holding the lantern, his body swaying with each roll of the ship, and his head craned forward as he peered along the yard. On our left, Jacobs, mad, fighting, cursing, praying, gasping, and outside of him, shadows and the night. I think that's all you need to hear right now. William Hope Hodgson.